Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at something almost unbelievable. A catastrophe so vast, so completely devastating, that it literally defies comprehension. Yet somehow it remained deliberately buried in the shadows for decades. We're talking about the Banqiao Precedent.
240,000 people dead. Just let that sink in for a second. It's a staggeringly massive number, and it marks the absolute deadliest dam failure in all of human history, period. But here's the crazy part. If you ask around, you'll find that most people have literally never even heard of it. So how on earth does an event of this magnitude just vanish from the record?
Section 1. The Forgotten Catastrophe, August 1975. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand what happened, we've got to look at central China. The Banqiao Dam was built in Henan province back in the 1950s with Soviet assistance. But in August 1975, nature threw a massive curveball. Typhoon Nina did something incredibly unusual. It just stalled right over the province. Over the next 24 hours, an entire year's worth of rain plummeted from the sky, just a relentless deluge. The Banqiao Dam simply couldn't hold it. It breached catastrophically, unleashing 600 million cubic meters of water. Imagine this, a wall of water up to 7 meters high and a terrifying 10 kilometers wide, tearing across the landscape at 50 kilometers per hour. The sheer unstoppable momentum was just devastating. And worse, it triggered a terrifying cascading failure. The floodwaters smashed into the downstream Shimontan Dam, completely obliterating it, and then just kept going, taking out 62 smaller dams and a massive chaotic chain reaction. 6 whole counties were submerged almost instantly.
Section 2. The secondary catastrophe. The aftermath. Now, the tone shifts here, because those initial 26,000 drowning deaths, tragically, they were just the start of the nightmare.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer disparity we're looking at. The immediate violence of the water drowned roughly 26,000 people. But the secondary deaths, they skyrocketed to 214,000. We're looking at a haunting 5 to 8 times ratio of secondary deaths versus primary drownings. And honestly, this is the exact ratio that haunts dam safety engineers around the world to this very day. So you might be wondering, why was that secondary number so incredibly high? Well, it's because the water wiped out the absolute foundation of survival. Infrastructure completely collapsed over a staggering 12,000 square kilometers. All the local crops were devastated. The drinking water became severely contaminated. And because the roads and railways were completely destroyed, the whole area was practically impassable. Rescue teams literally couldn't reach the hardest-hit areas for days. This total collapse of basic everyday services caused an absolute explosion of secondary deaths, from famine and epidemic diseases like cholera, typhoid, and dysentery.
It leads to a grim realization among those who study infrastructure disasters. The water is just the beginning. The real killing is done by what comes after. That's just a haunting thought to sit with for a moment.
Section 3. A 30-year secret. The veil of secrecy. We have to objectively look at the political reality of how an event like this stays hidden.
How exactly does the deadliest dam failure in human history go completely unnoticed? Well, the Chinese government classified the Banqiao disaster as a state secret until the year 2005. For 3 entire decades, this massive catastrophe was virtually unknown outside of China. The reasons were deeply political. Internally, the failure was attributed to construction defects, specifically insufficient sluice gates. Interestingly, engineers had actually recommended upgrades prior to the storm, but those upgrades were prevented by the strict political constraints of the Cultural Revolution. You see, acknowledging a disaster of this magnitude meant admitting a fundamental government failure, which was viewed as an existential threat to the state at the time. Because of this, no independent analysis or international investigation was ever permitted. Just objective historical facts here.
And this secrecy had a truly dire consequence. Without public knowledge of the disaster, there was absolutely zero public pressure for improved safety standards. The grim lessons of Banqiao were kept restricted to a tiny, tight-knit circle of officials and engineers, completely preventing any broad public accountability.
Section 4. Comparing Three Gorges, the scale of modern risk. Let's move to and see how this builds into our main focus today.
17 years after Banqiao, in 1992, the massive Three Gorges Dam was officially approved. Now remember, the Banqiao disaster was still completely classified at this point. Let's methodically walk through this and look at the terrifying difference in scale here. Banqiao held 600 million cubic meters of water. Three Gorges, it holds 39.3 billion cubic meters. Banqiao had a downstream population in the millions. Three Gorges has a downstream population of 400 million people.
So, the crucial point is the multiplier. The Three Gorges Dam has roughly 65 times the water volume of Banqiao and roughly 100 times the downstream population. Now, the arithmetic of disaster doesn't scale perfectly linearly. Obviously, modern infrastructure has improved a lot, but the order of magnitude here is absolutely sobering. You really feel the weight of those massive numbers. Section 5. Unlearned Historical Lessons, the Echoes of 1975. Now, to be totally fair, the engineers who built Three Gorges did have the classified Banqiao data.
They actually designed higher spillway capacities to account for physical failure risks. But the political lessons, the need for transparency, those were completely unlearned. Let's summarize the core truths Banqiao left behind. First, dams do fail and infrastructure neglect kills. Second, cascading failures where one breach takes out the next multiply the total damage exponentially. Third, secondary deaths from disease and famine will far exceed primary drownings. And most importantly, official secrecy completely prevents public scrutiny and learning. Today, the Three Gorges Dam operates behind the exact same veil of official reassurance that Banqiao did, making independent safety assessments practically impossible.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. If a 600 million cubic meter failure killed 240,000 people, what does a 39.3 billion cubic meter failure do? Honestly, no model can fully answer that, but every model agrees it would be significantly worse. History doesn't always repeat itself perfectly, but as we've seen today, it absolutely rhymes. Thank you for joining this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions about the infrastructure that powers our world.